Hello and welcome to my podcast, Bernadette Hall Talks, where we talk about grief, loss, pain, trauma, neuroscience and lived experiences of people that have experienced grief and loss. So today we're going to be talking about, is grief getting worse? I know it's pretty juicy content and something that a lot of people don't often talk about, and it's really important. Is grief getting worse? And when I say is grief getting worse, it's not to shame or criticise anyone. It's about actually, let's explore this, let's talk about it, because today we live in a world that is so fast, full of industry. Where does grief fit into that? You know, so you've got a member of staff who is off with grief. You know, where do you fit with that? Because, you know, grief isn't a spreadsheet, and grief doesn't respond to deadlines, and it certainly doesn't care about what your boss's expectations are. So today's society is all about keeping an upper lip, stiff upper lip, bouncing back from pain, get on with it. But actually, grief doesn't work like that. You can't just get on with grief. You can't just kind of think, oh, I'm okay. You know, I've worked with many grieving parents, mums in particular, where some of them have gone back to work 2 weeks after having a miscarriage or 2 weeks after having a bereavement of their child. And I'm like, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. So what's going to happen in those 2 weeks when somebody goes back is you're going to be smiling through meetings, putting a face on, and then apologising and going into the toilets to cry. Or people, you know, if you've got an empathic boss and colleagues, amazing. They would be supportive, you would like to think. But life, modern life, doesn't allow space for deep grief, does it? Let's be honest. It's too short. We don't get enough time on annual leave for that. Not annual leave, like bereavement leave. And grief doesn't, you know, you're going to swallow it and it doesn't disappear. You're going to bury it. And this is where complicated grief can come in. And complicated grief is persistent longing, guilt, shame, emotional numbness where you disassociate, isolate, and a sense of that life has no purpose anymore. And that is a fact. And personally myself, it's something that I can resonate with big time. When my son Jake died, many years ago, it'll be 27 this year, he was 11 weeks old, and before he was born, I was doing an apprenticeship and all of that. After he died, I had to go back to work within weeks. I remember, because it was a couple of weeks. Ended up working temporary in a factory, and it was horrific. I had to completely numb myself. I was working there with my partner. I'm like, I don't feel ready to be working. I feel pretty ill, you know, and it's like a hush hush. So that's when I kind of disassociated. And do you know what? 1 in 11 people will experience that complex grief. And what's going to happen then? You're going to be numb. You're going to not be able to kind of function. You're not going to be the back to yourself, how your manager would think you was going to be. Colleagues, friends may say something quite insensitive, even though they probably don't mean it. You know, some people are quite ignorant and don't always say, how are you? You know, do you need anything? Some employers are absolutely amazing, and I've seen amazing employers, you know, but sometimes they're so removed because they're looking at targets. You don't have a target for grief. There's no target. You know, as if you're a mum and you have lost your child through whatever circumstances, or had a miscarriage, or stillborn, or suicide, the spectrum is massive. There is no timeline on grief. There is no 2 weeks where you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to go back to work now. It just doesn't happen. And if it does, then it can impact on the outcome, on your mental health, as having complicated grief. Like I've just said, where you disassociate a sense of longing no more in the world, you know? So what do we need to do instead? So as a society, we don't need to be told you need more strength, because that's really passive. As a society, we need to be able to accept that actually grief is slow. It's slow, it's messy, it can be loud, there's no kind of timing. So it's about softness, it's about safety, it's about making sure that you feel in a safe environment to be able to grieve properly. So I'm talking about like communities where you can kind of have all of that around you, and you know, speaking to a grief coach, someone who has got that knowledge of what kind of could impact on you even more on your mental health. And grief isn't about sending someone a sympathy card. It's deep rooted in the soul, in support, and just not even asking someone, just saying, I'm going to make you tea tonight, and bring it over to them. Just do it. And you deserve space to have that. You deserve the space to be able to say, actually, I need that. So, that being said, you know, I am doing a masterclass on the 4th of April, and that is about the grief and the brain. And that is one of the reasons why I've kind of done this, because I think that grief and the brain and how we impact not grieving, and we just kind of become stuck and numb, it's really important to understand the brain and the science and neuroscience behind it. So that's what I'm going to be doing on Friday the 4th, and that is going to be at 8 p.m. UK time, and I will share more about that on my other social medias like Instagram, Facebook, all of that. But yeah, today is more around kind of airing that out and saying, actually, let's talk about grief. Let's talk about how it impacts on you in your work and going back. So I hope you've gained something from this, and even if it's a friend or a family member and they are there and you can kind of say, actually, do you need any support? Do you need anything? And I think employers need to be educated as well, a little bit more around, actually, 2 weeks isn't enough. And actually somebody may need 2 months, 6 months, a year, you know? And like I say, every grief is very different. So I thank you for coming today to my podcast, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you, bye.